when a mysterious accident exposes Chamilleia's deepest secret to billionaire Theodore Ashworth. Their carefully constructed worlds collide in ways neither could imagine. What starts as a simple employer-employee relationship transforms into something far more complex and dangerous. Welcome, cherished viewers. Tonight's chapter is woven with passion, betrayal, and the kind of love that changes everything. Let's dig in. The wooden ladder creaked ominously beneath Chamilleia's feet as she stretched toward the highest corner of the study window. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the pristine glass, casting golden patterns. Across the mahogany bookshelves that lined Theodore Ashworth's private sanctuary, the scent of leather-bound books and expensive cologne lingered in the air, a reminder of the wealth that surrounded her daily yet remained forever out of reach. She had cleaned these windows 100 times before, always careful, always precise. The navy dress with its tiny white flowers flowed around her ankles as she moved, each fold deliberately placed to conceal what lay beneath. 3 years of perfecting this routine, 3 years of maintaining her carefully constructed facade in the grandest mansion Willowbrook Hills had ever seen. The crack came without warning, sharp snap that seemed to echo through the vast room as the old wood finally surrendered to time and pressure. Chamilleia's heart lurched as she felt the ladder give way beneath her, her arms desperately grasping at empty air as gravity claimed her. Time crystallized into individual moments. The antique brass letter opener glinting on Theodore's desk, the Persian rug rushing up to meet her, the sickening impact as her right leg struck the heavy oak corner with devastating precision, exactly where 5 years of secrets lay hidden beneath layers of carefully chosen fabric. The pain was immediate and absolute, tearing through her body like lightning. But it was nothing compared to the horror that followed. The navy fabric had twisted during her fall, riding up past her knee to expose what she had spent years protecting. Scars terrible, twisted reminders of another accident, another time when her world had shattered beyond repair, the kind of marks that spoke of surgeries and metal pins, of dreams destroyed, and a future forever altered. Jesus Christ. Theodore's voice cut through her haze of agony. She hadn't heard him return from his meeting, hadn't realized anyone was witnessing her most vulnerable moment. Through tears of pain and shame, she saw him standing in the doorway. His expensive suit wrinkled from travel, his dark eyes wide. With shock, but it wasn't concern she saw in his expression. It was recognition, and something else that made her blood run cold. "Chamilleia Rose Patterson," he said slowly, each word deliberate and weighted. "Formerly Chamilleia Rose Mitchell. Aged 19 when you were struck by my company car outside Henderson University 5 years ago?" The world tilted on its axis. Through her pain, she stared at the man she had served for 3 years. The employer who had never truly seen her until this moment. His hands were trembling slightly as he approached, his face pale beneath his perfectly styled dark hair. "Settlement was sealed," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I remember everything about that case, the medical bills, the destroyed scholarship. The girl who disappeared after refusing to take the additional compensation my lawyers offered." Chamilleia's breath came in short, desperate gasps. The secret that had shaped every decision, every morning routine, every carefully chosen dress, now lay exposed between them. She tried to pull the fabric down, to cover the evidence of her past, but the movement sent fresh waves of agony through her injured leg. "You've been working in my house," Theodore said, his voice filled with something she couldn't identify. "For 3 years you've been serving the man whose negligence destroyed your life." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken truths. Chamilleia watched as Theodore's face cycled through emotions she had never seen him display: guilt, confusion, and something that looked almost like anguish. "Why?" he asked finally, the word hanging in the air like an accusation. "Why would you do this to yourself?" But before she could answer, before she could explain about Jasmine and sacrifice and the impossible choices that poverty demanded, the study door opened again. Mrs. Evangeline appeared, took one look at the scene, and her face went white as her starched apron. "Sir, I'll call an ambulance immediately," she said, already reaching for her phone. "No," Theodore said sharply, never taking his eyes off Chamilleia. "No ambulance. I'll handle this personally. As he moved toward her with purposeful strides, Chamilleia realized that everything had changed in the space of a heartbeat. The careful distance she had maintained, the invisible wall between servant and master, had crumbled along with that ancient ladder, and from the look in Theodore Ashworth's eyes, she wasn't sure if what came next would be salvation or something far more dangerous. Theodore's private doctor arrived within 30 minutes, a silver-haired man named Dr. Harrison who asked no questions, and maintained the kind of professional discretion that money could buy. He worked in silence in Theodore's bedroom. It's the only space in the mansion with adequate privacy. While Chamilleia lay on Egyptian cotton sheets worth more than her monthly rent, the irony wasn't lost on her. After 3 years of cleaning these rooms, she was finally experiencing their luxury, but as a patient rather than a guest. The pain medication Dr. Harrison had administered created a strange floating sensation, but it couldn't numb the ache of exposure that settled deep in her chest. The leg needs rest, but there's no new fracture, Dr. Harrison informed Theodore quietly, as if Chamilleia couldn't hear every word. However, the previous injuries were extensive. Multiple breaks, reconstructive surgery, she'll need proper care for the next few weeks. She'll have it, Theodore replied, without hesitation. After the doctor left, the silence returned, thick and uncomfortable. Theodore sat in the leather chair beside the bed, his tie loosened, his usually perfect composure fractured. He had been watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as if he were trying to solve an impossible equation. "Tell me about your sister," he said finally. The statement caught her off guard. "How do you know about Jasmine?" "I know everything about that accident, Chamilleia. Every report, every medical record, every family member affected." His voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "I know she was in the car with you that day. I know she walked away without a scratch while you nearly died." Chamilleia closed her eyes, but the memories came flooding back anyway. The screech of tires, impact that had sent their small car spinning, as Barrison's terrified screams as emergency responders cut them from the wreckage. The moment she realized that her dreams of becoming a teacher, of lifting them both out of poverty, had died on that rain-slicked street. "She's studying nursing," Chamilleia said quietly. "At the community college? She doesn't know I work here. And the money you send her? She thinks it comes from where? A cleaning service downtown?" The lie felt heavier now, spoken aloud to the man who had made it necessary. "She thinks I work for several small businesses." Theodore stood and walked to the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his expensive shirt. "Do you have any idea what these past 3 years have been like for me? Knowing I destroyed someone's life and never being able to make it right?" The girl disappeared after the settlement. "My lawyers couldn't find you. I changed my name back to my mother's maiden name, moved across the city, started over as my employee." He turned back to face her, his dark eyes blazing, with something between anger and anguish. "Do you understand how twisted that is? You've been cleaning my house, serving my meals, existing in my peripheral vision while I tried to live with what I did to you." Chamilleia struggled to sit up, ignoring the protests from her injured leg. "You weren't driving that car, but I created the conditions that led to it. The pressure I put on my drivers to maintain impossible schedules. The culture of cutting corners to maximize profit." His voice cracked slightly. "I built an empire on efficiency, and you paid the price." The admission hung between them, raw and honest, in a way that transformed everything, Chamilleia thought. She knew about Theodore Ashworth. This wasn't the distant billionaire she had observed from the shadows. This was a man carrying his own scars, his own carefully hidden shame. "I need you to understand something," she said, her voice stronger. "Now, I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because I needed a job that paid well enough to support Jasmine's education." The irony was an accident. "Accident," he repeated bitterly. "That word seems to define both our lives." A knock interrupted the tension. Mrs. Evangeline peered around the door, her motherly face creased with worry. "Sir, there are several board members downstairs asking about your delayed meeting." Theodore's jaw tightened. "Tell them something came up. Reschedule everything for next week." "Sir, The Patterson account merger alone is worth $40 million. I don't care if it's worth $400 million, he snapped. Handle it, Evangeline. I have more important things to deal with right now. After the housekeeper left, Chamilleia stared at Theodore with new understanding. You're canceling $40 million worth of business? For me, money has never been the point, he said quietly. Not since that day 5 years ago when I realized it couldn't fix what I had broken. The vulnerability in his admission created something dangerous between them. A crack in the walls they had both built. A glimpse of the people they were beneath their carefully constructed roles. Chamilleia felt her heart respond in ways that terrified her, because she was beginning to see Theodore not as her employer or even as the man whose company had destroyed her leg, but as someone who understood the weight of carrying shame. There's something else you should know, Theodore said, moving closer to the bed, about why I recognized you so quickly today, about why your face has haunted me for 5 years. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was her college ID picture, the one taken just weeks before the accident, when she still believed her future stretched bright and unlimited before her.
Hey.
I've carried this every day since the accident, he whispered, to remind myself of the cost of my choices. Chamilleia stared at the photograph, at her younger self's hopeful smile, and felt something crack open inside her chest. The careful distance she had maintained, the protective walls she had built, suddenly seemed as fragile as the ladder that had brought them to this moment. Theodore, she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. There's more, he said, his voice rough with emotion, something I never told anyone, not even my lawyers, something that's going to change everything between us. I was in the car that day, Theodore said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not driving, but sitting in the passenger seat when my driver ran that red light. The confession hit Chamilleia like a physical blow. All these years, she had pictured him as a distant figure, someone who learned about the accident through reports and legal documents. But he had been there. He had witnessed her pain firsthand. I saw your face through the windshield right before impact, he continued, sinking into the chair beside the bed. 19 years old, probably thinking about classes or friends or whatever normal college students think about. And then suddenly you were gone, disappeared beneath the hood of my car. Chamilleia's breath caught. You saw me. I saw everything. Your sister screaming your name, your blood on your forehead. The way your leg was twisted at an impossible angle, his hands clenched into fists. I held pressure on your wounds while we waited for the ambulance. You were conscious for a few minutes, delirious from shock, but conscious. I don't remember any of that. You kept apologizing, Theodore said, his voice breaking. Even as you were dying on that pavement, you were apologizing to me for the inconvenience. That's when I knew what kind of person you were, what kind of person I had destroyed. The weight of shared history settled between them, transforming the dynamic that had existed for 3 years. Chamilleia studied his face, seeing new lines of pain she had never noticed. Shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and persistent guilt. Is that why you never fired me? She asked. Even when I broke your mother's antique vase last year? I've been protecting you without you knowing it, making sure you got raises, ensuring your schedule was manageable, intervening when other staff members complained about your reserved nature. He met her eyes. I've been trying to give you everything I could without revealing why. Over the following days, as Chamilleia recovered in Theodore's home, their relationship shifted into uncharted territory. He worked from his study while she rested, checking on her every few hours with a careful attention that felt nothing like the distant employer she had known. They began to talk. Real conversations that stretched late into the evening, covering everything from her abandoned dreams of teaching to his complicated relationship with the empire he had built. She learned that his success had come at a devastating personal cost, that he had sacrificed relationships and genuine connections in pursuit of an achievement that ultimately felt hollow. I haven't had a real conversation with someone in years, he admitted one evening as they shared dinner in his private sitting room. Everyone wants something from me. Money, connections, favors. You're the only person who knows the worst thing I've ever done and doesn't want anything in return. Maybe that's because you already took everything I had to give, Chamilleia replied, but there was no bitterness in her voice anymore. only a strange understanding of how tragedy had shaped them both. "Tell me about before," Theodore said. "Before the accident, what were you like?" So she did. She told him about her dreams of becoming an elementary school teacher, about the scholarship that would have paid for her entire education, about the small apartment she had shared with Jasmine and their plans to buy their mother a house someday. She spoke of poetry she used to write and books she had loved, of a version of herself that felt like a distant memory now. "You could still teach," Theodore said quietly. "I could arrange for you to return to school, full scholarship living. Expenses, whatever you need. I'm 23 years old. I've been out of school for 5 years. That dream belongs to someone else now." "Dreams don't have expiration dates, Chamilleia." The way he said her name had changed. No longer formal or distant, but warm, almost intimate. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the moment each day when he would set aside his work and simply be present with her. It was dangerous, this growing connection. She could feel herself beginning to care about him in ways that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect. The man she was discovering beneath the billionaire facade was complex and deeply wounded. Someone who understood the weight of carrying shame and the price of survival. "I need to tell you something," she said one evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset through the tall windows, "about why I really stayed in this job for 3 years. Theodore looked up from the book he had been reading. Aloud to her, one of the classics she had mentioned loving. "Tell me." Part of it was the money, yes, but there was something else. She took a breath, preparing to reveal another layer of truth. "I was studying you, learning everything I could. About the man whose company destroyed my life. I told myself it was to understand, to find some way to make peace with what happened." "And did you find peace?" "No," she admitted. "But I found something else. I found that you were carrying the accident too in your own way. That knowledge changed everything." Theodore closed the book and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, careful not to disturb her injured leg. What else did it change? Question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. But when Chamilleia looked into his eyes, she saw her own dangerous feelings reflected back. At her? This wasn't just about guilt and forgiveness anymore. Somewhere in their shared pain, something deeper had taken root. "Everything," she whispered. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if he were afraid she might disappear again. "I need you to know," he said, his thumb tracing patterns across her palm, "that regardless of what happens between us, I'm going to make sure Jasmine finishes school. I'm going to take care of the medical bills you've been hiding. I'm going to give you back every opportunity I took away. And what do you want in return?" Theodore's eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want you to let me try to earn something I don't deserve." "Your forgiveness, your trust. Maybe someday, if I'm very lucky, something more." The confession hung in the air between them, dangerous and beautiful and terrifying. Because Chamilleia was beginning to realize that despite everything, despite the twisted circumstances that had brought them together, she was falling in love with Theodore Ashworth. And from the way he was looking at her, she wasn't falling alone. But neither of them could have anticipated that Mrs. Evangeline was standing just outside the door, having overheard every word with a cell phone in her hand and a look of horrified determination on her face. The first hint of trouble came with the morning newspapers. Mrs. Evangeline delivered them to Theodore's study, with trembling hands and tears in her eyes. But by then it was too late. The headlines screamed across the front page of the city's largest tabloid: "Billionaire's secret shame. Tech mogul harbors. Victim of his own company's negligence." Theodore's face went ashen as he read the article aloud to Chamilleia, who sat frozen in the chair across from his desk. Every detail was there. The accident 5 years ago, her real identity, her employment in his household, even intimate details about their growing relationship that could only have come from someone who had been listening at doors. Sources close to the Ashworth household report that the victim, now 23-year-old Chamilleia Rose Patterson, has been working as domestic staff while concealing her identity. Theodore read, his voice hollow with betrayal. The same Source suggests that Ashworth has been conducting an inappropriate relationship with the woman whose life his company destroyed, raising questions about manipulation and abuse of power. The article went on to speculate about settlements and cover-ups, about a wealthy man taking advantage of a vulnerable employee. It painted their connection as something sordid and exploitative, twisting every genuine moment they had shared into evidence of corruption. Who? Chamilleia whispered, though she already suspected the answer. Mrs. Evangeline appeared in the doorway as if summoned, her face streaked with tears, but her jaw set with determination. "I'm sorry," she said, addressing Theodore directly, "but I couldn't stand by and watch you ruin yourself like this. You." Theodore's voice was dangerously quiet. "You did this?" "I've worked for your family for 30 years, Mrs. Evangeline said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I watched your father build this empire with integrity. I raised you from a boy. I've spent the last 5 years watching you destroy yourself with guilt over something that wasn't even your fault." "It wasn't your decision to make, Theodore," said, standing slowly. "She's manipulating you." Mrs. Evangeline cried, pointing at Chamilleia. "Can't you see that? She came here under false pretenses, worked her way into your home, your trust, your bed. This is all calculated revenge." "Stop," Chamilleia said, finding her voice. "That's not true, isn't it?" Mrs. Evangeline's eyes blazed with protective fury. "You had 3 years to reveal who you were. 3 years, to be honest. Instead, you let him torture himself while you played the innocent victim."
Oh.
The words hit their mark. Chamilleia felt the shame crash over her like a cold wave because there was enough truth in the accusation to make it sting. She had chosen deception. She had watched Theodore suffer without offering the honesty that might have healed them both sooner. "I was trying to protect my sister," she said weakly. "By seducing the man responsible for your injuries, by making him fall in love with you before revealing the truth?" Mrs. Evangeline shook her head in disgust. "You're nothing but a gold digger with a sob story. Enough." Theodore's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Get out. You're fired. Security. We'll escort you from the premises immediately." Mrs. Evangeline's face crumpled. "Teddy, please. I did this to protect you. The board is already calling for an emergency meeting. The stock price has dropped 15% since the story broke. This will destroy everything your father built." Theodore was already reaching for his phone, calling security. Within minutes, the woman who had been like a mother to him was being escorted from the mansion, leaving behind 30 years of service and a betrayal that cut deeper than any business failure when they were alone. The silence felt suffocating. Theodore stood at the window, his shoulders rigid with tension, while Chamilleia remained frozen in her chair, afraid that any movement might shatter what little remained between them. "Is she right?" he asked finally, not turning around. "Was any of this real, or have I been the biggest fool in the world? Can you ask me that after everything we've shared? Because I don't know anymore." He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. 3 years, Chamilleia. 3 years of deception. How do I know the woman I fell in love with even exists? "She exists," Chamilleia said desperately, struggling to her feet despite the protest from her injured leg. "Everything between us, every conversation, every moment, it was real. But it was built on a lie. It was built on survival." The words came out fiercer than she intended. "Do you think I wanted to live this way? Do you think I enjoyed watching you suffer while I scrubbed your floors? I was 19 years old when your company destroyed my future. I've spent 5 years just trying to exist, trying to build something from the wreckage." Theodore's phone rang, cutting through the charged atmosphere. He glanced at the screen and his face darkened further. "It's my lawyer. The board wants to meet immediately." As he answered the call, Chamilleia could hear urgent voices discussing damage control, emergency meetings, and the possibility of Theodore stepping down as CEO to protect the company. She watched the man she had come to love transform back into the distant billionaire, the walls rebuilding themselves in real dash time. When he hung up, his expression was cold and professional. "I have to go handle this crisis. When I return, we need to discuss your future arrangements." "What does that mean?" "It means I need to figure out how to separate my personal feelings from what's best for everyone involved." He moved toward door, then paused. "The board is right about one thing. This scandal could destroy thousands of jobs, affect retirement funds, ruin lives beyond just ours. I have responsibilities that go beyond my own heart. After he left, Chamilleia sank back into the chair, overwhelmed by the devastating irony. She had spent 3 years trying to protect their separate worlds. Now those worlds were colliding in the most destructive way possible. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. Check your bank account. Your final payment for services rendered. Don't be here when I return. The coldness of the message hit her like a physical blow. She checked her account to find a transfer for $50,000, enough to support Jasmine's education and their modest lifestyle for years to come. It was generous beyond measure and felt like the most painful goodbye she had ever received. But as she sat alone in the mansion that had been her workplace and briefly her home, Chamilleia realized she wasn't ready to give up. Not on Theodore, not on what they had built together, and not on the possibility that love could survive even the worst betrayal. She reached for her phone and made a call that would change everything one final time. The boardroom at Ashworth Technologies had never seen anything like it. Chamilleia Rose Patterson, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress that covered her scars, walked into the emergency meeting uninvited and unannounced. The 12 board members fell silent as she approached the head of the table where Theodore sat, his face a mask of controlled shock. "Ma'am, this is a private meeting." The board chairman started to protest, but Chamilleia held up a hand to stop him. "My name is Chamilleia Rose Patterson," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And I think it's time you heard the truth about this scandal from someone who was actually there." Theodore's lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear, but Theodore held up a hand for silence, his eyes never leaving Chamillea's face. "5 years ago, I was struck by one of your company vehicles," she continued, addressing the room with the poise of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I was 19 years old, on my way to classes at Henderson University on a full academic scholarship. The accident ended my dreams of becoming a teacher and left me with injuries that will affect me for the rest of my life." The board members shifted uncomfortably, but she pressed on. "What the newspapers don't tell you is that Theodore Ashworth has spent 5 years carrying guilt that wasn't his to bear. He wasn't driving that car, didn't make the decision to run a red light, but he held pressure on my wounds while I bled on the pavement, and he's been trying to atone for something that was never his fault." "Miss Patterson," the chairman interrupted, "while we appreciate your perspective, this meeting is about protecting the company from liability." "No," Chamilleia said firmly. "This meeting is about destroying a good man because you're all too cowardly to see the truth. Theodore Ashworth didn't seduce or manipulate me. He didn't even know who I was until 4 days ago. I chose to work in his house. I chose to keep my identity secret, and I chose to fall in love with him." The admission rang through the boardroom like a bell. Theodore's carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing the pain and hope he had been trying to hide. "I have a proposal," Chamilleia continued, reaching into her purse and pulling out a folded document. "A public statement that I'm prepared to release to every major news outlet in the city. In it, I take full responsibility for the deception. I explain that I sought employment under false pretenses for my own reasons, and that Theodore had no knowledge of my identity. I make it clear that our relationship developed naturally and honestly, without coercion or manipulation." She placed the document on the table and looked directly at Theodore. "In exchange for this statement, which will clear your name and protect the company, I'm asking for one thing: the chance to start over. It's not as your employee, not as your victim, but as someone who knows you better than anyone in this room ever will." The board chairman picked up the statement and began reading, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. "This would indeed mitigate the damage," he admitted grudgingly. "It would do more than that," another board member added. "It would actually enhance Theodore's reputation, make him look compassionate rather than predatory." But Theodore wasn't listening to the board's calculations. He was staring at Chamilleia with an expression that made her heart race. "You're giving up your leverage," he said quietly. "With this statement, you lose any claim to additional compensation. You're protecting me at your own expense." "I don't want your money, Theodore. I never did." She moved closer, ignoring the fascinated stares of the board members. "I want the man who spent 5 years carrying a photograph of a stranger in his wallet. I want the person who reads poetry. Aladdin cancels $40 million meetings because someone he cares about is hurting. I want you. Theodore stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. The board is right about one thing. This scandal could have destroyed everything I've built. My father's legacy, thousands of jobs, the future of this company. And Chamilleia asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. And none of it matters if I lose you in the process. He turned to address the board, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. Gentlemen, I'm accepting Miss Patterson's proposal. Draft the press release. Handle the media response. Prepare the paperwork for my temporary leave. Of absence, Theodore? You can't, the chairman protested. The company needs stable leadership right now. The company needs ethical leadership. And the most ethical thing I can do right now is take time to build something real with the woman I love. He moved around the table to stand in front of Chamilleia. If you'll have me. There's one more thing, Chamilleia said, her voice trembling. With emotion, I called Jasmine this morning, told her everything. About the accident, about who you are, about what's been happening between us. Theodore's face went pale. What did she say? She said it was time I stopped living in the past and started building a future. She also said that anyone who could inspire me to be this brave must be worth keeping. Chamilleia smiled through her tears. She wants to meet you, properly this time. Theodore reached for her hands, his touch gentle and reverent. Are you sure about this? Once I walk out of this boardroom with you, there's no going back. No more hiding, no more pretending we're anything other than what we are. And what are we? Chamilleia asked. To people who found love in the wreckage of tragedy, Theodore said softly. To people who learned that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the darkest soil. Chamilleia felt the last of her walls crumble as she looked into his eyes. I love you, she whispered. Despite everything, because of everything, I love you. I love you too, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that some accidents lead to exactly where we're supposed to be. As they walked out of the boardroom together, hand in hand, the board members sat in stunned silence. Outside the tall windows, the city sprawled beneath them, full of millions of people living their separate lives, unaware that in this moment, two hearts had finally found their way home. 6 months later, Chamilleia stood in the garden of their new home, a modest estate. Outside the city where she could tend flowers and Theodore could work without the crushing pressure of corporate expectations, she wore a simple white dress that flowed to her ankles, not to hide her scars anymore, but because she loved the way it moved in the summer breeze. Jasmine was graduating from nursing school the following week. Her education fully funded, and her future bright with possibility. She had forgiven both of them for the complicated path that had led them together. Understanding finally that love rarely arrived in neat packages, Theodore emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of tea, his expression peaceful in a way that would have been impossible during his years as CEO. He had sold his controlling interest in the company, using the proceeds to establish a foundation for accident victims and their families. The work gave him purpose without the soul-crushing weight of empire building. Any regrets? He asked, settling beside her on the garden bench they had built together. Chamilleia considered the question seriously. She thought about the dreams. She had lost the pain they had both endured, the complicated path that had led them to this moment. Then she thought about the man beside her, the love they had built from honesty and forgiveness, the future that stretched bright and unlimited. Before them, only one, she said, taking his hand in hers. I regret that it took us so long to stop hiding from each other. Theodore lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her palm, right over the faint scar she bore from catching herself during that fateful fall from the ladder. Then let's promise never to hide again. Never again, she agreed, as the sun set over their garden, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Chamilleia realized that some stories don't end with the closing of wounds, but with the opening of hearts. Some love isn't born from perfection, but from the courage to be imperfect together. They had both been broken by the same tragedy. And in finding each other, they had discovered that broken things could be made beautiful when fitted together with care, patience, and the kind of love that sees scars not as flaws, but as evidence of survival. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, and Chamilleia smiled, knowing that this was not an ending at all, but the first page of a story that would be written in joy rather than sorrow, in hope rather than regret, together. They had learned that the most profound love stories are not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections fit perfectly with your own. Don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and share to spread kindness. The end.